The most quoted speech in all of history may also be the most quietly misread, and the crowd, who heard it first, came within a breath of missing it too. One man at the edge of that crowd almost did. He had every reason to turn around before it even started. Instead, he stayed, and it is only because he stayed that you can read a single word of it today. The path up the hill is loose stone and dry grass, and by mid-morning it is already crowded. You are somewhere in the middle of that crowd. Your feet hurt. The sun is on the back of your neck, and you are not entirely sure why you climbed up here, except that everyone else was climbing, and something in you did not want to be left at the bottom. Look around at who came. The faithful are here. Yes, the ones who still show up, who still hope. But so is everyone else. A mother who lay awake again last night doing arithmetic that never comes out right, counting bread against the number of mouths. A fisherman who has watched one empty net follow another, close enough now to ruin that he can taste it. A young man whose jaw tightens every time a Roman patrol passes, whose hands have already imagined the weight of a blade. And the quiet ones, the people who walked away from the religion of their childhood years ago and told themselves they felt fine, standing here anyway, hungrier than they will admit. Now look at that one man near the edge. He used to sit at a table by the road, with a ledger and a lockbox, collecting Rome's taxes from his own neighbors, taking their coins and handing them to the empire that occupied their land. People spat when they spoke his kind of name. His name is Matthew. Hold on to him, because years from now, in a city far from this hill, that same man will sit down and write out every word you are about to hear, and it is only because he does that you can read them at all. But we are not there yet. Stay with him. We will come back. Every person on this hillside carried something up besides sore feet. They carried voices, loud, certain voices that had already told them what a blessed life looks like, what God wants, and how the world actually works. There was the voice of the Pharisee, righteousness you could measure with a ruler. How many steps on the Sabbath? How carefully you washed? How visibly you gave? Faith you could check off a list. And most of the people on this hill had been failing that list their whole lives, going to bed most nights certain God was disappointed in them. There was the voice of the zealot, done waiting on heaven, sharpening iron in back rooms, sure the kingdom would arrive the day enough Roman blood ran in the streets. And there was the voice of Rome itself, the oldest voice of all. The strong eat, the weak serve. Power is the only thing that is finally real. 3 voices. And if you go quiet for a second, you can still hear every one of them today. Then the carpenter reached the top, and he sat down. You may not feel the weight of that, but the crowd did. In their world, a teacher stood up to read the scriptures and sat down to teach. Sitting was the posture of authority. So when this man, from Nazareth, no title, no temple standing, sawdust practically still on his sleeves, lowered himself onto the hillside and let the noise die, every person there understood. He is about to speak, as though he has the right to be obeyed. He looked at them, the desperate, the furious, the exhausted, the forgotten. He let the silence stretch until it was almost uncomfortable. And then he opened his mouth and blessed the very people the world had thrown away. This is not a lecture. This is not a list of rules for good people. This is not a pretty poem to hang on a wall. This is a carpenter sitting in the dirt, about to take apart, quietly, line by line, nearly everything this crowd believed about God. And the strangest part is where he chose to begin. Not with the powerful, not with the impressive. He began at the very bottom. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The very first thing out of his mouth is a blessing, and he lays it over the heads of people the world had trained to think of themselves as leftovers. That word blessed is doing more than you think. In Greek, it is makarios, and it does not mean the thin, flickering happiness that rises and falls with your circumstances, the kind that shows up when the money comes in and vanishes the moment it goes out. Makarios is a deep, settled fullness the world can neither hand you nor take back. Jesus is not congratulating people who have it good. He is announcing that a certain kind of life already carries something unshakable inside it, no matter what the day looks like. Most people read the Beatitudes like a buffet. 8 blessings, 8 kinds of people. Find the one that fits your situation, take it, and leave the rest for somebody else. Here's what most people miss. Many have read them as both a portrait and a progression, a picture of one heart, and a path a heart travels. But read them slowly, straight through, and they stop sounding like 8 separate announcements about 8 separate groups. They start to look like a single face. One life, traced from the inside out. And it begins where every honest life with God has to begin. Poor in spirit is easy to get wrong. It sounds like walking around advertising how broken you are. But Jesus is pointing somewhere much deeper, the raw honesty of a person who has finally stopped performing in front of God. You put down the image. You quit pretending you have it handled. And what's left standing is the plain truth that you cannot save yourself and you need Him. That honesty is the door. Everything else in the sermon walks through it. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. This is bigger than grief over a loss. This is grief that finally sees clearly, sorrow over what has gone wrong in you, in the people you love, in the world outside your window. The person who mourns like this has stopped numbing themselves. They have chosen to feel the wrongness of things instead of scrolling past it. And Jesus says those are the very ones God comes close to and comforts Himself. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Meekness gets mistaken for weakness. It is the opposite. The Greek word is praus, and it was used for a war horse that had been broken and trained. Enormous power, fully under control. Muscle that does not move until the hand on the rein says move. Picture a soldier whose sword stays in its sheath until his commander speaks. That is meekness. The strongest person in any room is the one who has nothing left to prove. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Most readings go shallow right here. In the Bible, righteousness is bigger than private holiness. It is also justice, the setting right of what is wrong. So this is not only about wanting to be a good person. It is about people who ache for the world itself to be mended, who cannot stand the gap between the way things are and the way they should be. Jesus calls that hunger a blessing. It is a sign you are still alive inside. Now watch what happens. Those first 4 described something inward, the soul standing before God. The next 3 turn outward, into how you treat everyone else. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. You cannot honestly be poor in spirit and stay hard toward the people around you. You cannot truly mourn what is broken and still feed the division in your own kitchen. The inside always shapes the outside. The Beatitudes work less like a list and more like a chain, each link pulling the next one along behind it. And then the final one seals the whole portrait. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. He ends with honesty, live this way, humble, mourning, meek, aching for justice, merciful, clean-hearted, making peace, and the world will push back on you. It pushes back precisely because you are doing something true in a place that has arranged itself around something else. The resistance, he says, may be the very proof that you are still on the road. 8 sentences, 1 face. Jesus painted a single kind of life on that hillside, and then he turned and told the crowd it was theirs to step into. They were still catching their breath when he looked at them again, the tired, the small, the ones nobody in Jerusalem would have named, and said something they could hardly believe was aimed at them. You are the salt of the earth. Not you should become. You are. Already. Now. To a crowd of fishermen and farmers and people who had just been told they were blessed in their emptiness. You have to understand what salt meant to them. In a world with no refrigeration, salt was the one thing standing between a fish caught at dawn and rotting meat by dusk. Salt held back decay. It went quietly into whatever was starting to spoil and stopped it. So when Jesus calls them salt, one of the sharpest edges of the picture is this. Your presence is supposed to keep something from rotting. So ask it plainly. Is anything around you less corrupted because you are in the room? Is your home more patient because you live in it? Are your kids learning mercy because they watched you choose it when you were exhausted? Is there a table at work where the gossip dies because you will not pass it along? Is there a friendship that never curdled into bitterness because you forgave before the apology ever came? Salt does not announce itself. It just enters what would go bad and quietly holds the rot back. Then he reached for light, and of all the images he could have picked, he chose the humblest. A single household lamp, set on a stand, so the people in one small room can stop knocking their shins on the furniture. He is not asking you to blaze like the sun. He is asking you to be steady, reliable enough that the people near you can find their way by you. And then he named the temptation out loud, because it is a real one. No one lights a lamp and puts it under a bowl. We reach for the bowl constantly. We go silent when our conscience is telling us to speak. We laugh along when something in us knows better. We keep our convictions off the table because we do not want to make the room uncomfortable, and we tell ourselves that is wisdom, when sometimes it is only fear wearing a nicer name. Jesus answers all of that with one plain command. Let your light shine, not so people will look at you, but so they will look up. So they will see the good and give the glory to your Father in heaven. And notice the order of everything so far. Before he tells them how to live, before the long stretch about anger and lust and prayer and money and worry, he stops and tells them what they already are. Salt, light. It was true of them before they did anything. Their only job was to live like it. And now, having told them who they are, he was finally ready to show them what that life looks like the moment it walks out into the real world. Stop for just a second, because we are standing at a hinge in the sermon, and it is worth catching your breath here. Look at what he has already done. He climbed a hill, sat down in front of the poorest crowd in the country, and told them they were blessed, not someday, but right now, in the middle of their emptiness. Then he looked at those same overlooked people and called them the salt holding the world back from rot, the light a whole room walks by. He has not asked them to do a single thing yet. He has only told them who they already are. If that has landed on you even a little, if some part of you needed to hear that the fullness God offers does not wait for you to get your life in order first, then do the small thing that helps this reach the next tired person scrolling past it. Subscribe. Leave a word below telling me which line has followed you this far. It costs you nothing, and it puts this in front of someone who climbed their own hill this morning and does not yet know they were the one being blessed. Because from here, the ground shifts. Jesus is about to stop describing the life and start showing you what it costs, and he begins in the last place his listeners expected. He turns and puts his hand on the one thing they trusted most in all the world, the law itself. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. You can almost feel the crowd tense. These people had carried the law their whole lives, some as a comfort, some as a weight, so heavy they had quietly stopped trying to lift it. And here is a carpenter from Nazareth, with no credentials and no standing in the temple, telling them what he intends to do with the most sacred thing their nation owned. Not tear it down, fulfill it, carry it all the way to the place it had been pointing the entire time, and finally show them what it was really for. Then he did something no teacher of his day would have dared. 6 times he took a command they had known since childhood, and he pulled back the surface. You have heard that it was said, but I tell you. And every time, he moved the line from the hands to the heart. He started with murder. You have heard, do not kill. And the crowd relaxed. Most of them had never killed anyone. They had stayed on the clean side of that law their whole lives. Then he stepped straight past the act to the soil it grows in. The anger that hardens into contempt. The quiet verdict you pass somewhere inside, that another human being is worthless. He was not making the command heavier for the sake of it. He was making it honest, because anyone who has ever truly hated another person knows exactly where that road ends if nobody stops it early. He did the same with adultery, moving from the act to the look you choose to keep holding, the fantasy you keep feeding, the thing you already know is quietly breaking you from the inside. And then he reached the hardest one of all. You have heard, an eye for an eye. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. For 2,000 years people have read that as a command to be a doormat, to swallow abuse, and say nothing. But it helps to know something about how that world worked. To strike a man's right cheek, a right-handed person has to use the back of the hand, and in that culture, a backhand was not how you fought an equal. It was how a master corrected a slave, how the powerful shamed the ones beneath them. It was an insult more than a blow. And once you see that, turning the other cheek starts to look like something very different from surrender. Watch what it does. It forces the aggressor into a corner. He cannot backhand you again from that angle. His only options now are to walk away, or to strike you the way one equal strikes another, which is the one thing his whole position refuses to admit you are. Read that way, turning the cheek was never weakness. It looks more like quiet, deliberate defiance, a refusal to be shamed, and a refusal to hit back, both at once. Then he took that refusal to strike back and pushed it to the very edge of what a human heart can do. You have heard, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. You have to feel the ground this landed on. These people lived in an occupied country. Some of them had buried family under Roman swords. Hating the enemy did not feel like sin to them. It felt like loyalty. It felt like justice. And it was not just a feeling. Remember the young man with the itch for a blade? There was a whole movement built on that fury, the zealots, and one of them, a man history remembers as Simon the Zealot, was sitting close enough to Jesus to be counted among his 12. This was not theory. The historian Josephus, who lived through it, recorded where that road finally led, a revolt that ended with Jerusalem burning and the temple in ruins, a generation that chose the sword and was buried by it. Jesus looked straight into that fury and asked them to pray for the very men holding the spear, and his reason went deeper than being nice. Hatred slowly reshapes whoever carries it. Fight a monster long enough with a monster's weapons, and one morning you look in the water and the face staring back is his. Praying for your enemy is not mainly for the enemy. It is how you keep your own soul from hardening into the thing you swore you would never become. He closed the whole sequence with a line that has unsettled people ever since. Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. That word perfect is teleos, and it does not mean flawless, spotless, without a single mistake. It means complete, mature, whole in love. And the verse right before it tells you exactly what he meant. God sends rain on the good and the evil alike. He pours out sun on the ones who curse him. That is the completeness he is asking for. Love that reaches even the people who have given you every reason not to. You can feel the weight stacking up on the crowd now. So Jesus turned a corner and led them somewhere quieter, into the hidden places. Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others, to be seen by them. He did not attack giving, or prayer, or fasting. Those were the 3 pillars of a devout life, and he left all 3 standing. What he went after was subtler, something even the most religious people there had never been warned about: the slow habit of using holy things to build a self. Helping someone, then waiting for them to notice. Praying in a voice that sounds rich in public and goes silent the moment the door closes. Fasting with a tired face, hoping somebody wonders what you gave up. When you give, he said, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. He was describing a person who has simply stopped keeping score, whose generosity flows so naturally they never go home and add it to a private ledger of all the good they have done. Then he taught them to pray and gave the world words it has not stopped saying since. Our Father in heaven. 2 words, and everything shifts. He could have taught them to open with king or judge. Instead, he put Father on their lips. You come the way a child comes home, already belonging, with nothing to prove. And look at the order. Hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done. God's name, God's kingdom, God's will, all of it, before a single one of your own needs is mentioned. Surrender comes before the asking. The heart gets turned around before the requests begin. Most of us pray it exactly backwards. We lead with our list and try to remember God somewhere near the end. Jesus shows you the other direction entirely. Give us this day our daily bread. Just today. Enough for the day in front of you. Nothing stockpiled against tomorrow. Dependence chosen on purpose, not admitted through gritted teeth. And then a line he refused to let slide by. Forgive us our debts, as we have forgiven our debtors. He cared about that one so much that the moment the prayer ends, he circles back and stops on it alone, because refusing to forgive does not just poison your relationships. It closes the very pipe the mercy of God is trying to flow through. A hand clenched shut around what someone owes you cannot open to receive what you owe and cannot pay. Here's the part nobody tells you. Everything he just said about the heart and the hidden places and forgiveness, it all comes to a head over one very ordinary thing. Money and worry. For most of the sermon's history, people have treated those as two separate lessons. Jesus saw one sickness wearing two masks. Do not store up treasures on earth, but store up treasures in heaven. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Whatever you lean on to feel safe, that is where your heart quietly moves in and lives. Maybe this is you. Before your feet even hit the floor, the money is already on your mind, the bill that is due, the little left in the account, how to stretch it to the end of the month. You are afraid before you are even awake, and the fear has moved into the first minutes of your day. Then he named the choice hiding under it. No one can serve two masters. You cannot serve both God and money. Sooner or later, one of them takes the chair and starts telling you what everything means, whether the day was good, whether your life is on track, whether you get to sleep tonight. The real question is simply, which master is doing the talking? Then he turned to worry, same disease, different symptom. Do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink. And remember, he said this to their faces, on a hillside, to people whose stomachs were genuinely empty. He never once calls the fear silly. He points at the birds and the wildflowers, lives that are hardly easy, and yet no sparrow invents the particular torture we do, rehearsing a future that has not come, grieving a loss that has not happened, living whole days inside a tomorrow that may never arrive. But seek first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be given to you as well. Here is the thing he had been driving at the whole time. The cure for worry is not gritting your teeth and trying harder to be calm. The cure for worry is worship, the daily, deliberate act of turning your whole life to face a God who is already holding the exact thing you are most afraid of losing. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. It might be the most quoted sentence Jesus ever spoke, and one of the most twisted. In our world, it gets used as a conversation ender, a way to silence anyone who dares to think something is right or wrong. As if the carpenter had spent his life wandering Galilee announcing that nothing is true and nobody is allowed to notice anything about anyone. But he meant something far sharper. There are two very different things hiding inside the word judge. One is simply noticing that something is wrong. The other is condemning the person who did it, passing final sentence, appointing yourself the last word on another human being's worth. And everything around this verse makes plain which one he was talking about. He was telling them to get out of a chair that was never theirs to sit in. You can still see clearly. You just do not get to hand down the verdict. Then he showed them how ridiculous they looked trying. Why do you stare at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own? We have all done it. We catch the sharp edge in someone else's tone and never hear it in our own. We can quote back word for word what someone said to us 5 years ago and completely forget what we said yesterday. And notice, most people quit reading right after do not judge and miss the whole second half, where he actually tells them what to do. First, take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's. First, that one word carries the whole thing. He is not forbidding you to help. He is telling you the order. The only person who can be trusted to touch someone else's wound is the one who has felt a plank pulled out of their own, because they will go slow. They will keep their voice down. They remember exactly how much it hurts. That is the posture he is after. And it is the same posture that runs straight into the line everyone knows. So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. We have called it the golden rule, so long that most people no longer hear what it says. And to hear it, you have to set it next to its quieter cousin, a version that shows up in nearly every culture on earth. Do not do to others what you would not want done to you. It sounds almost the same. It is a completely different animal. That quieter rule only asks you to hold still. Do no harm. Stay out of the way. Keep your hands to yourself, and you have passed. What Jesus said was the opposite. Do. Move toward the person. Picture what they need before they ever ask, and go meet it. The quiet rule lets you sit on your hands, as long as your hands aren't hurting anyone. His rule will not let you sit at all. This, he said, sums up the law and the prophets. Every command about loving your neighbor, every plea for justice the prophets ever cried out, all of it pressed into one posture. Treat people the way you would ache to be treated. But he knew something about the human heart. He knew that the moment we hear a beautiful teaching, the temptation is to admire it and walk off unchanged. So he refused to let them leave in the warm glow of it. Instead, he drew them a map. 2 gates. 2 roads. 2 places they end. Enter through the narrow gate. 4 wide is the gate, and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many go through it. But small is the gate, and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. There is no neutral third path. And the narrow road is narrow for a reason. It is every single thing he just described. The Beatitudes are narrow. Loving your enemy is narrow. Giving so quietly your own hand doesn't notice. Trusting instead of clutching. Pulling your own plank before you reach for anyone's speck. Treating people better than they have earned every ordinary day. That is the narrowest road there is. Most people end up on the wide one for the simplest reason in the world. It is where everyone already is, and it asks nothing of you that you did not already feel like doing. And here is where I want you to meet a man who spent the first half of his life sprinting down the wide road as fast as he could. His name was Augustine. 16 centuries ago, in North Africa, he had brilliance, ambition, applause, every pleasure he reached for, and a hole in the middle of him that none of it would fill. He built his whole life on sand and could not understand why it kept shifting under his feet. And then one afternoon, sitting in a garden, undone, he heard a child's voice on the other side of the wall singing a little sing-song. Take up and read, take up and read. He picked up the scriptures, and the words went into him like a foundation being poured. The man who would write one of the first great commentaries on this very sermon had to first become the fool who built on sand. Before those words on, that far-off hillside became the rock the rest of his life stood on. Because that is exactly where Jesus was heading. He stopped teaching, and he told a story. Everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. He paints it slowly. 2 men, 2 houses, 2 foundations. And here is the part that should stop you cold from the outside. On a bright afternoon, the 2 houses look identical. Same walls, same roof, same windows. Walk past them in the sunshine, and you could not tell them apart. The difference is invisible. The difference is underground. Both men heard the same words. The same sermon, the same day, the same hillside. One heard it and built. The other heard it and admired. That is the entire gap between them, and it is the gap most of us live inside for most of our lives. Now remember the man we left at the edge of the crowd, the tax collector, the one with every reason to walk away before it started. He did not walk away. He heard every word, the blessing over the poor in spirit, the call to love the enemy he had been serving, the narrow gate, the house on the rock. And he built. He got up from that hillside and eventually got up from that table by the road and followed the carpenter. And years later, in a city far from Galilee, Matthew sat down and wrote it all out, line by line, so that it would outlast the storm and reach a hillside he would never see. Yours. The words in front of you right now exist because one man on the edge of the crowd chose to build instead of admire. When Jesus finally stopped, the crowd just sat there. Matthew, the same Matthew, tells us they were astonished because he taught as one who had authority and not as their teachers of the law. They had climbed that hill with 3 voices roaring in their ears, and in a single afternoon, sitting in the dirt, the carpenter had answered all three. To the Pharisee measuring holiness in public inches, he offered a righteousness that lives where no one can see it. To the zealot, with his blade, he handed the harder weapon to love the enemy and pray for him. And to Rome, with its ancient gospel that the strong eat and the weak serve, he promised the whole earth to the meek. Three voices that had owned that hillside for generations, and one carpenter took every one of them apart before the sun went down. And then the crowd stood up, brushed the dust from their clothes, and started back down the hill. Every one of them carried the same words home. The same blessings, the same call to be salt and light, the same prayer that begins with Father, the same two roads, and the same two houses, and the same storm coming for both. The sermon had been identical for all of them. What set them apart from that day forward was the smallest, quietest thing imaginable, what each of them did with the words once they got home. That is what makes this so unsettling, because that hillside never really stayed in the past. Every time someone honestly runs into what Jesus set up there, the whole scene reassembles around them. The crowd, the carpenter lowering himself into the dirt, the words hanging in the air. And the person listening has to decide the one thing the first crowd had to decide. Will you carry these words home as something you admired, or as something you actually intend to live? So let me hand you three things to take down the hill. The first is simple, and it changes how you read all of it. This was never a list of rules to make good people slightly better. It was a foundation, handed to you one stone at a time. Blessed are the poor in spirit was a stone. Love your enemies was a stone. Give in secret. Seek first the kingdom. Pull your own plank first. Stones, all of them, passed into your hands one by a man who wanted you to build something that would still be standing when the weather turned. The second is the one most of us would rather not hear. There is almost no distance between the wise man and the fool. They heard the same sermon. They had the same chance. The only difference was that one of them got up and built, and the other got up and walked away moved. Admiring these words costs you nothing and saves you nothing. You can quote the whole Sermon on the Mount and still be building on sand. Hearing was never the point. Doing was always the point. And the third is the one I cannot soften, because he did not. The storm is coming. He does not describe it. He leaves it blank on purpose, so you can write your own name across it. The illness, the phone call in the middle of the night, the betrayal, the grief that arrives without knocking. Whatever your storm turns out to be, it will do the one thing every storm does. It will find out what your house was standing on. And by the time the rain is falling, it is far too late to start digging a foundation. So here is the only question left, the same one the carpenter left with the crowd. What are you going to build with today? Not with the rest of your life. Not someday, when things settle down. Today, maybe it is a conversation you have been dodging for months. The one where loving your enemy stops being a lovely idea and turns into an actual phone call you have to dial. Maybe it is the prayer you have mumbled 1,000 times, prayed just once all the way through and meant, including the line about forgiveness you have always quietly skipped. Maybe it is a kindness done so quietly that not even your own left hand catches you doing it. Maybe it is one worry, named out loud and handed over, instead of rehearsed in the dark one more time tonight. Small stones, but those are the only kind a real house is ever built from. I want to ask you something before you go, and I actually want your answer. Of everything the carpenter set on that hill, which line reached in the deepest, and what is the one thing you are going to build with it before the day is over? Tell me below. I read them. Now close your eyes for just a second and put yourself back on that hillside. Feel the dust and the sun and the shoulders of the crowd pressed in around you. See the carpenter sitting in front of you, looking at you the same way he looked at every desperate, furious, exhausted, forgotten face that morning. And understand that every word he spoke for you. Because he did. So build, friend, while there is still light, while the sky is still clear, while the choice is still in your hands. Build.